voice of FinTech.
Welcome to Voice of FinTech, a podcast mapping out the Swiss and global FinTech scene, connecting FinTech enthusiasts with startups, incubators, accelerators, business angels and VCs, and incumbents interested in partnerships. Voice of FinTech will help you navigate the FinTech ecosystem. Here you can listen to the startup founder stories, what investors and incumbents are looking for when dealing with startups, and find out more about resources provided by incubators and accelerators. My name is Rudy Falad and I'll be hosting this podcast. Hello and welcome to Voice of FinTech. We are talking today to Albion VC's team. That is a well-known VC firm based out of London, part of Albion Group, and we're going to talk about what they are up to. They invested in companies that help our everyday lives, like Booking.com and many others, focusing also on FinTech and deep tech and healthcare. But we're going to talk primarily about FinTech and what's going on, what are their views on what has happened in the last few months and what we can expect going forward. So welcome, Ed and Jessica. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you for inviting us along.
Doing well. Thanks a lot, Rudy.
Brilliant. So can you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us what brought you to VC investing?
I can take a start here because I'm newest to Albion. I've been with the firm about a year and been in VC for about a year. I took actually a rather meandering path to VC. Originally, I was actually working more in international affairs and international economics. Got my master's in econ, and I worked in Washington for the Obama administration, doing mostly financing for large infrastructure projects in emerging markets. But quite a few of these were in telecommunications and actually the space sector. So it was my first exposure to tech. After a few years in Washington, I moved over to Wall Street and started covering tech, media, telecom, M&A for Rothschild. And I did that in New York for a few years and then moved over to the London headquarters and covered European M&A. Towards the end, I was doing a lot more enterprise software and saw this as just a spectacular sort of growth area that I wanted to sort of lever my career more towards. And so, I wanted to move over to the investing side as opposed just to the advising side and work with these sorts of high growth businesses. Was looking at, more traditional investing, like for instance, private equity, but saw that there was quite a bit more financial engineering than actual engineering, which wasn't as exciting to me. So I started looking at VC and really only considered one firm, which was Albion. And I think they sort of found me, in which I think was a sea of banker and consultant CVs. And Ed took a chance on me, and I've been doing this work for about a year now and really enjoying it.
Great stuff. And Ed, you've been a partner at Albion for a while. I guess you joined Albion when, becoming a VC investor wasn't that obvious. It has become quite fashionable in the last few years. But when you started it a while back, what attracted you to do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And having to cast my mind back quite a while, because I've been here now for 16 years. But when I left university, I didn't really know what I was going to do. And back then, one of the obvious things you might do for a while was banking, as you kind of learn some skills and figure out how the world works. And I was just sort of lucky enough to be advising companies during the dot-com boom and bust. And there were some just extraordinary stories of companies that would go from like 50 million of value to 1 billion back down to 8 billion, all within sort of 18 months. And that was exciting, but also a bit sort of hysterical. Nonetheless, the sort of just the excitement, I think, it was all driven obviously by the kind of birth of the internet. And it was just a really interesting time generally. And then in terms of like the sort of companies we were working with, a lot of the banking community and advisory community gets really excited by sort of mega mergers and really big deals. And I always remember just finding the slick companies and sort of working with these sort of entrepreneurs who had, they'd just been in hospital and, this is sort of before mobile phones, they were in a hospital and they needed to, ring a relative and they couldn't. And so they, we'd come up with this idea of some new, sort of phone system that you could be sort of wheeled around a hospital, and they just go make it happen, and then go and build a company around it, and then go and float it, and then go and be a big success. And just like, it was just so cool just watching this stuff. And so when I decided I want to move on from banking, there was the obvious route was to go into private equity if you want to stay in the financial world. And then I just kind of fluked upon meeting the team who were there at Albion, and I just loved them, and just was working with all these small companies, and I gave it a go, and I've been doing it ever since.
Right. Well, great. But maybe we should also explain how Albion VC fits into the Albion Group, right? I mean, can you tell us a bit how does that relationship work?
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. But so basically, we run these funds, we've VCT funds, which are sort of specific to the UK, and they're generalist early stage funds. They have a mandate to invest in kind of young businesses, and we've got, that was always what we did, and was investing in everything from tech, but also through to building care homes or setting up drinks distribution companies. I mean, any business in its sort of infancy as it was going, and over time that we've done well. We've been lucky enough to get some investments right. The funds have grown, and then what we've ended up doing is specializing. And so Albion VC is now the VC, the pure VC bit of the broader Albion business. And now we've got a sort of dedicated team and very clear focus and mandate as to what we're doing on the tech side.
Right. And what's your investment focus or philosophy? Maybe Jessica, you start for change.
Sure, absolutely. So we focus on B2B software and digital health at the Series A stage. And Series A for us means sort of post-product market fit, where we can help the companies sort of scale from there. And then, within B2B software, we can be quite vertical agnostic, whether that's, FinTech or cybersecurity or other industry that software is designed for.
Right. And what sort of checks do you write?
Our initial check size is typically £1 to £5 million.
Okay. And are you focused only on the UK or only Europe, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's right. So we focus, from a geography point of view, we focus on companies with significant presences in the UK. We like the sort of management close to home so that we can have a really close relationship with them, a really supportive relationship, and some significant UK element of the business needs to be present.
So do you pop in their offices, or did you before the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. We would like to stay in really close touch with everyone in the portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you make there, though, because I mean, certainly been our philosophy to date, like the benefit of having, I'd say we focus on the UK, but a lot of them are in London, and the benefit of being able to just drop around someone's offices and see how they're doing, is really clear. So, if we're moving to a kind of hybrid or remote first world, it definitely, changes the model.
No, the other point about the UK focus is that because we've been doing early stage investing for 20 years in the UK, we have a really incredible network of supporters of the UK tech community and the UK early stage business community. So we can offer the most support to companies with a UK focus through our network here.
Right. And how much money have you raised since inception, and how many startups are we talking about? I think I've seen somewhere you have 50 startups in a portfolio or 50 investments, and a few $100 million that you have put together, or are you managing now? What's the situation right now, Ed? Yeah.
Yeah, we've been around for quite a while. So, I mean, the first fund was raised back in the late 90s. So, since then, we've invested in about 200 startups. We've been in, I think we have, been involved in about 600 fundraising rounds in them. And like working out exactly how much we raised is not completely straightforward, because we have a sort of annual fundraising cycle. But we've got about £600 million under management at the moment across 3 different funds.
Right. And you mentioned that you focus on B2B software. Within that, you have FinTech, right? But FinTech is still a very wide word, wide category. So do you have any preferences? Does it have to be B2B FinTech or P2P, or do you like or do you hate blockchain? How do you see that?
I think within FinTech, we've over-indexed, I think, on software for financial services players. So a B2B business model and a software business model as opposed to, say, a neobank or a peer-to-peer lending service or something along those lines. So, some good examples of that from the portfolio might be Quantexa, which is a data analytics network generation software that can for banks initially to help them fight financial crime, but also increasingly used for KYC, increasingly used around customer insights for these large banks. Another great example would be Imandra, which sells automated software testing software that can help explain what were formerly black box AI algorithms that a lot of banks are using for trading. So, for instance, Goldman Sachs is a client of theirs. So it tends to be software where there's a financial services client.
Right. Okay. Understood. And how do you find them? I think obviously you mentioned you have an amazing network. You've been around for a while, so I suspect that you have a lot of inbound. But let's push it a bit further. And would you give a chance to somebody from Manchester who doesn't have any connection to you or your connections, and maybe they have a great idea they came up with in their bedroom? So how would somebody like that be able to approach you and stand out? What are you looking for when you hear ideas?
Absolutely, they would be able to approach us for sure. We look at everything. So, inbounds, a lot of what we do is inbounds, guys like that reaching out to say that they have a company and they have an opportunity. And we also do quite a bit of outbound research on themes we're interested in and subsectors we're interested in, and startups that are coming through the community in those themes. But when we invest is at the Series A stage. So we invest post what we call product market fit. So you have a product, not just an idea, but an actual sellable MVP and product, and you've already sold it to 2 to 3 to 4 enterprise sort of customers, and that all sort of look the same, and you're selling that same product for the same use case. And typically, when we're talking about sort of the level of commercial traction, that all usually adds up to about $1 million of recurring revenue. So we invest at that Series A stage when things are post product market fit. But when things get to that stage, we look at all sorts of different companies, as long as they're a B2B software company, whether they have existing connections to us or not.
Right. And Ed, what's your investment approach, when you look at it a bit more from a technical point of view? So obviously you take a minority stake. Do you try to get the board seat every single time, or sometimes observer seat is all right? And when you come in at Series A, are you staying until the very end, or, you participate in a couple of rounds and then you exit, or how does that work?
We like to be as supportive as we can while respecting the fact that we're not part of the exec team. We don't run the company. We invest, and we've got loads of experience of investing in, companies with many similar challenges, and we try to bring that experience to bear. And as Jess mentioned, we've got a increasingly deep network of people that can help along the way, be it to help on the hiring side, international expansion, product roadmap, or whatever it is. But there are kind of, it's just as we're investing in companies that we know they've got something now because they've sold now on a kind of repeatable basis, and we kind of fit well. So they've solved a problem that is repeated, and we're trying to see how that business that's got something can then scale into an international organization. So we'll be involved as much as they want, but that typically means a board seat. That typically means we have a stake that is meaningful enough that our voice is listened to, and then we just try to be to remain, I guess, involved on a merit basis. We will often after our initial investment sort of maintain our pro rata stake through to the exit for as long as we can.
All right, understood. That's great. Well, Jessica mentioned a couple of examples of where you invested, but if you look back also at successful exits and also your companies where you invested, Ed, can you brag a little bit more and say, this is something I'm really proud of, where we started, supporting this company early on and our bets worked out?
I'll just pick a very early one and a very recent one because that's maybe a good nice
Sure.
sort of framing, and maybe some nice ones in between. So you mentioned Booking.com. So it's actually one of our colleagues, Will, met Lee Phillips, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Active Hotels, right at the beginning of their journey. I think it was just 2003. So this is the depths of the dot-com bust, and the idea that here was, an internet business, it was not going to get you in the door of many investors. But Andy he just sort of graduated from INSEAD, and as an MBA grad, who had come up with a business plan, then went and tested it. He rang up 700 hotels, I think, before confirming there was definitely an opportunity here to build an online bookings platform. Anyway, so the business came in, it was very early, but they were showing immense growth. It was very clear it was a profitable business model out the blocks. And so, we invested in it. I think that was the first financial round into the business. So that company then grew to about £100 million of value from, it was, single digits when we invested within about 18 months. It was then bought by Priceline and then merged with Booking.com. So most of the back end stayed with Active Hotels. Obviously, the brand was Booking.com. The combined businesses have grown now to what is still the most successful startup to come out of Europe. So that was quite a journey. And then more recently, Jess mentioned Quantexa, which has been a really amazing investment to be part of so far. So we met the company, I think they were 6 months old when we first met them. Incredible team who you just was so excited to work with. And they had maybe 20 odd people. And it was incredibly competitive even back then. I think they had 17 companies that they were speaking to about an investment, even though they were so young. And they've gone now from those 20 odd people, we're now, I think, almost 300 people. And it's 3 years since we invested. They've now selling to many of the largest banks globally. They have been spotting, human trafficking rings. They've been spotting, it's one of those companies that come in and said, we've just found something. We can't tell you what it is because it's, when you in the world of money laundering and financial crime at that scale, it's often quite serious. But, the company's grown in value 20 times since we invested 3 years ago. It's still growing out really fast. Amazing team. Just proud to be a part of that.
All right. So, Jess, you worked in the US and you worked in Europe. There are a lot of cultural differences and, of course, the governance or setup of a country or a market differences between the two. But when you see the similar differences between the UK and the rest of Europe, what are your thoughts about startups, scaling up and their ambition level and going global ideally? Do you think that the people are thinking about it a bit more in the UK than on the continent, which is a bit kind of common knowledge, or the other way around, or it's individual? And what would be your message to aspiring entrepreneurs building their businesses?
Right. So we're really focused on the UK tech ecosystem, given our fund mandate. So this is sort of, we know our home court best, and we really view the UK as a great source of global innovation. So the drivers here are world-class research hubs, world-class universities, its sort of historical role as a magnet for talent from all over the world. And London especially has developed a great network to support entrepreneurs. So there's great research coming out of the local universities. There are incredible finance and world-class customers all together in sort of one city, and entrepreneurs coming up through that network. In fact, we just saw a report on the AI landscape that showed that London actually has the second largest number of AI companies after the Bay Area and ahead of New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which just speaks, I think, to the quality of the tech research that's coming out of some of the institutions here. UCL's computer science department, for instance, developed the Bloomsbury AI team, which sold to Facebook. DeepMind coming out of London. Lots of the technology behind Alexa coming out of Cambridge. There's a lot of deep AI, interesting, cutting edge research going on here. It's also incredible how the sector has changed just in the last few years. a few years ago, there were only a couple of accelerators. And then 2 years later, there were 90 here in the UK. So there's a great early stage scene here. In terms of global ambitions, we definitely look to support really ambitious founders that want to build unicorn level businesses, decacorn level businesses that will inevitably scale globally to support, that size of a business. And what's great about enterprise software is that's really achievable because you're dealing with enterprise clients that are global anyways. And there's a lot of those kind of clients based here in the UK, whether that's global banks, many of which are based out of the UK, global insurers, global healthcare companies, all sorts. So we view the scene as having changed really positively in the last few years.
Great. So let's stay optimistic then.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next question is a bit more, wide-ranging. I mean, how do you see the prospects of fintechs versus incumbent banks, Ed? Because some people say, you may agree or not, that especially in Europe, people quite early on realized that it's very difficult to build a B2C brand. I mean, there are a few, but in comparison to the US, a lot of the fintechs have gone through the route of cooperation with the incumbents rather than trying to destroy them or disrupt them. So what is your view on this, and especially your focus on B2B software and working with the incumbents?
So, on the B2C side, it is really interesting to see the progress of the challenger sort of banks and other kind of consumer fintechs that have emerged recently. And, they don't have, decades of legacy systems holding them back. Their agility is their sort of competitive advantage. And also, they don't have quite the regulatory glare and lens. And, we've definitely seen a few startups where you're like, why are the banks not doing this? And then you dig into it, like they just can't risk, like it being done and something bad being found within there, because they get fined on the basis of the size of the whole bank rather than relative to the size of the particular case in hand. And so I think, I think we're going to see a lot more to come still on the consumer side. I mean, the other big change coming through is open banking and all of the opportunity that comes with that. And again, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the startups to, just sort of see the news and move into them before any of the banks do. But the banks have got the brand, they got the trust, and they got the balance sheet. So, and particularly here in Europe, there's some really enormous global incumbents that are, world class in every respect. They're going to be very difficult to compete with. So probably the better opportunity is where you see a new market opening up and you move into that new market and you're the first and you become the de facto leader in that new bit rather than trying to disrupt, pretty formidable competitors.
All right. So it's been great talking to you, Jessica and Ed. And my last question is, where do interested parties find out more about Albion? And what's the most efficient way to reach out, whether through LinkedIn or your website or what have you? And what kind of people would you like to hear from most, whether that's startup founders or if you're raising another fund, maybe LP investors?
We'd love to hear from entrepreneurs, and anyone can be in touch with us at hello@albion.vc, or you can be in touch with me directly on Twitter. I'm at Jess_invest. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Voice of FinTech podcast. If you haven't already, check out also voiceoffintech.com, where you will find all the episodes and additional resources related to the podcast. You can also subscribe to Voice of FinTech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or any other podcast app that you like. If you have any suggestions on the topics or guests, or how to make this podcast better for you, please email us at info@voiceoffintech.com. Happy to hear from you. Thank you.